UST, Uniform State Test Component. You need to know that HERA is the law that created the SAFE Act. What law created the SAFE Act? HERA. You need to know that the SAFE Act stands for the Secure, not the Safe, the Secure and Fair Enforcement Act. And make sure you know that the N in NMLS stands for nationwide, not national, nationwide. So make sure you know those three things. HERA is the law that creates the SAFE Act. The SAFE Act stands for the Secure, not Safe. And the N stands for nationwide. And sometimes they ask you, what does the R stand for? The R stands for registry. You need to know what two entities created the entire NMLS system. Highlight CSBS, that's one, along with the AARMR, highlight that one. Those are the two organizations that created this entire NMLS system. They're going to say the CSBS and the AARM created the NMLS. You are a loan originator if you're taking a loan application or negotiating a mortgage. A lot of people out there should have this license and they're still doing, they're calling them junior processors or things like that, and they should really have this license. If they are negotiating mortgages, discussing rates, things of that nature, they're supposed to have this license. So if you're taking applications or negotiating mortgages, you're supposed to have this license. Okay? If you get caught, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. If all you are really doing is administrative and clerical, you don't have to have this license. So if all you're doing is administrative and clerical, you're not discussing rates and terms and things of that nature, you're fine. You're just doing paperwork. If you're only doing timeshares, you don't have to have this license. If you only need to do a loan for a member of your immediate, underline immediate, family member, you don't have to have this license. I don't want to be in the loan business. I'm just trying to help my daughter with a loan. I got to get licensed to do a loan for my daughter? No. That's my immediate family member. Or my mom, immediate family member. You don't have to. Then they're going to ask you, does a processor or an underwriter have to have a license? And everybody wants to say no. But the answer should be, it depends. Who do they process or underwrite for? That's going to determine whether or not they should be licensed. Who do they process or underwrite for? If they process or underwrite for an FDIC insured bank, then no, they are not licensed. They are what's called registered. But if they're an independent processor or underwriter, then the answer is yes. Case in point, my sister works for Chase. She has an NMLS number just like I do. She does the same thing, process, underwrites, does loans, but she can only do them for Chase. She is what's called a registered loan originator. She doesn't have to take this test. She doesn't have to do continuing education. She doesn't have to do the class. She doesn't have to do anything. Get up, comb your hair, go to Chase, got hired. That's it. They give her a number. It's registered to Chase. But I have a friend. Her name is Shawn Davis. She's a processor. She works from home. She has her own processing company. It's called Unique Processing. She does some processing for me, for some other people that I know, for a few banks as a contractor. She has to do the same thing we have to do. She had to take the test. She has to do continuing education. She has to pay all the fees. So the question is, when they pass out their business cards, who do they represent? If they represent an FDIC insured bank, then no, they are what's called registered. They don't have to do any of this. Yeah, they have a number just like us, but they don't have to do any of this. But if they're representing themselves, their own company, then yes, they have to do the same exact things that we have to do. So don't get that wrong, because they're going to give you a lot of questions in this section about whether or not a processor or underwriter has to be licensed. It depends on when they pass out how do they represent themselves to the public? Do they work for a bank? Then no, then they're registered. Or do they work for themselves? Then they're licensed just like us. Registered loan originators work for a bank. No other really way to say it. State licensed loan originators, all the rest of us. Everybody has a number. Either your number is registered, work for a bank, or your number is licensed. All this money, time, energy, effort that we have to do. That's all it means. You have to have never lost your license in the past. If you lose this license, go learn something else. They will never, ever give it back to you. It used to be a time I lost my license in Texas, let me move to Utah. Oh, I messed up in Utah, let me move to Jersey. Not anymore. That's why they have us on a registry. If you lose this license, just go learn something else. You have to have not pled guilty of a felony in the past 7 years. But if the felony dealt with money crimes, ever. So if you had a felony in the past 7 years that didn't have to do with money, Ponzi schemes, all of that, you're okay. But if you had a felony and it dealt with money crimes, you'll never get it. I could have committed felony manslaughter 10 years ago. I'll get licensed. If I committed felony Ponzi scheme 150 years ago, I'll never get it. The only exception is if I got pardoned by the governor. So you need to know that. If you got pardoned, then they'll let you in. You have to do 20 hours of pre-licensing, highlight the 20. But they're going to ask you, of that 20 hours, how many hours had to be federal? How many hours had to be ethics? How many hours had to be non-traditional? And you see that other 12 hours, for those of you that took this class, the 20-hour class online, that's why you didn't pass. That other 20 hours of fluff that they put in there. Okay, and then you studied that stuff for the test. The test consists of 3 hours of federal, 2 hours of ethics, 2 hours of non-traditional. The other 12 hours, the instructor could have talked about whatever they wanted. Probably sound real good. Probably stuff you need to know to be in the business, but not necessarily what you needed to know to pass the test. And that's why people in online classes have a hard time. You don't know what to study, and you're studying way more stuff than you need to. Of the 8 hours, you have to know how many federal never changes, how many non-traditional, how many ethics. And you have to know the term successive year rule. Highlight that. That just means you cannot take the same continuing education class every year. You can go back to the same school. We have our students come back every year, but each year we have to teach something different. If we don't change our curriculum, they're not going to get credit. Successive year rule. You can't get credit for the same exact course. This map, and it needs to be updated now, this map, and in your email that I'm going to send you in a minute, you'll have an updated one. All the ones here in the blue and the yellow, once you pass this test, you can do loans in all those states. This is what I need you to do on your paper. Circle Minnesota, all the way up there in the top. Circle Minnesota. And circle West Virginia. As of today, every state on this map besides those two are now blue. Which means once you pass this test, you can do loans in all of the states except for Minnesota and West Virginia. I have family in Texas. I do their loans here, even though my sister works for Chase. But everybody doesn't qualify for Chase loans. I do their refis here. I have people here that own property in New York or Pennsylvania, or that family there. I help them here. Once you pass this test, you can do loans in all these states. Now, some states require additional education. For example, look at Nebraska. It says 22 hours. Well, you've already done the 20 hours. If you want to do a loan in Nebraska, go online to my website, do the 2 hours. Next. Learn about Nebraska. Look at Connecticut. You have a loan in Connecticut. You've already done the 20 hours. Go online and do the 1 hour. You don't have a loan in any of these states? Then don't worry about it. Make sense? You need to know the term state regulatory authority. Highlight that. State regulatory authority. The state regulatory authority is what I call your babysitter. The state regulatory authority. They're going to ask you on the exam, what can the state regulatory authority do and not do? That is who you are licensed under. State regulatory authority. Just happen to be in California, we have the BRE and the DBO. But in Texas, it's called something different. In New York, it's called something different. In Pennsylvania, it's called something different. So you're not going to need to know that for the exam. You're just going to need to know the term state regulatory authority. Who do you have to report to? Now, the state regulatory authority is responsible for supervising you, making sure you're registered, conducting investigations. They can deny you, suspend. They're your babysitters. That's who is in charge of you during this mortgage licensing. I need you to highlight the last 3 bullets. Those are the most important ones that you need to know for this exam. You have to have what's called, each state has to have what's called protection options, because most loan officers really don't know what they're doing in the beginning. So if you go out there and get sued, where does the money come from? Because we don't have money either. Well, either they're going to require that you have a minimum net worth. If you don't have a minimum net worth, which there's some guidelines to that, then they're going to want you to get bonded. Just like if you're a notary, you have to have E&O insurance. They're going to require that you get bonded. Most companies will pay for a bond for you. Or if you're a real estate agent, you pay dues already, and each state has what's called a state recovery fund. So they're going to ask you on the exam, what are the 3 protection options that each state regulatory authority have to have in place? They're either going to require a net worth, surety bonding, or state recovery fund. Those are the 3, and you need to know them by name. You also need to remember, or you need to know, that a state regulatory authority cannot issue a prison sentence. They ask that a lot. They're going to say, which of the following things can they not do? They cannot send you to jail. They can take your license, they can suspend your license, they can give you a fine, but they don't get to send you to jail. Now, they may send your case over to the district attorney and let him send you to jail, but for the test, the state regulatory authority does not issue a prison sentence. The penalty for violating the SAFE Act, $25,000. Highlight that. The penalty for violating the SAFE Act, $25,000. If you don't want to pay that $25,000, do not do any of the things that I have on these next 2 pages. Because if you do, you will be fined $25,000. But you couldn't do any of them anyway. Can you practice without a license? No. Can you defraud borrowers? No. Can you break the rules? No. Can you beat up the appraiser because he didn't give you the value that you wanted? No. Can you take the people's deposit money and go pay your own bills with it? No. Any of those things would be a violation of the SAFE Act. And if you do any of them, you will be fined what? $25,000. And that brings us to the end of that. Now, I've made you guys some charts. Okay? So you want to pay attention to these because this is going to help you. You need to know what came after what. Look at here. HERA came first. Then came the SAFE Act. The SAFE Act is actually Title V of HERA. You need to know that. FACRA, Regulation V, came first. And then the FACT Act, which has Section 114 rules. What are those? Red flag identity theft rules. What are the 3 things under the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act? Safeguarding, pretexting, financial privacy. What are the 3 things under the Fair Housing Act? Blockbusting, steering, and redlining. What are all of the things that make Tilla the Godzilla? You need to know all of these laws are under Tilla. They're going to say Hope Alone is part of which larger law? Tilla. Section 32, part of which larger law? Tilla. And on and on and on. All of these things are under Tilla. This is why we call Tilla the Godzilla. You need to know here with ECOA and FACRA, and make notes right here on your paper. They're going to say, what is a protected class under both ECOA and fair housing? And look at the first 5. Sex, race, religion, color, national origin. Those are protected under fair housing and ECOA. But then they're going to say, what's protected only under ECOA? Age, marital status, receipt of public assistance. What's protected only under fair housing? Disability and familiar status. But you're going to get a lot of questions that says, what's protected by ECOA but not fair housing? What's protected by fair housing but not ECOA? What's protected by both fair housing and ECOA? And you're going to be happy that we made this chart. Okay. This next one, FACRA versus FACT Act. Remember I told you one of them you get a free credit report if, and the other one I told you has no if. So under FACRA, write if. You can get a free copy of your credit report if, and you can go back to the page where I gave you the 4 reasons why you can get a free copy of your credit report under FACRA. But remember, FACT Act, you don't have to have a reason. So write no if. Under FACT Act, You get a free copy of your credit report once a year. You don't have to have a reason. Know which one you have to have the reason for and which one you don't have to have the reason for. Do you get that? And then I think I got happy and gave you guys the charts over and over and over again. But that's pretty much it.